All right, how's it going, y'all? So today we're going to be going over how to set up and install the #1 upgrade I recommend pretty much everybody start with whenever they get a Synology NAS. And that is how to back up a Synology NAS to an external hard drive. This is seriously one of the things that I think most people completely overlook, and it's something that can be incredibly cost effective and a great idea for people. They make like 20 terabyte external hard drives, and while they're not cheap, they're also not that expensive, especially compared to cloud costs and things like that. And so if your data that you really care about, I'm not talking about the random stuff in your backups of your computers and that stuff that you just really don't care about that much. It's nice to back up, but it's not critical. I'm talking about the data that you really cannot live without. If that's under 20 terabytes for you, you should seriously look at picking up one of these on the exact same day that you buy a Synology NAS, because you can set up and kind of forget about it, and it is really there to protect you in a lot of cases. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set up this external hard drive to basically have our Synology back up to it every single night, and we're going to be able to say what folders we want backed up and can get super granular with it, so you only have to really back up the critical files. A lot of people think that RAID is a backup, and while RAID does protect you from hardware failure, it doesn't protect you from everything. It doesn't protect you from a crash where the Synology completely goes bad and it corrupts the volume. It's very unlikely, but you never know. And so that's why it's still important to have a true backup in a separate media, in a separate storage and everything of your NAS, at least for those really important files you cannot live without. Your family photos, things like that. This does not fully replace a cloud backup, but it is 90% the way there. And it is a great place to start, especially if you don't want to spend a ton of money on a cloud service backing up your entire thing. But instead you can buy one of these for a couple $100 and then have a very solid backup for no monthly reoccurring costs, which is absolutely awesome. By the way, I do professional consulting. There's a link for that down in the description below. I can help set up all these kinds of things. And subscribe. We are close to hitting 100,000 and we're really trying to get there. But so what we're going to do is we're just going to set this thing on up, and I'm specifically picking a drive that is essentially a standard drive. A lot of people will try to do this with like a Drobo or something like that that requires client software to run on the device. So if you have to install something on Windows or Mac to get this to work, it probably will not work with the Synology. Another thing that people try to use are Thunderbolt drives. I don't know of any Synologies that take Thunderbolt and USB are actually separate standards. The way we're going to hook this up is with the standard USB-A cable that came in the box with this drive. This is a powered, I think, 16 terabyte drive. And so pretty much all Synologies have a USB port on them. And so you plug into them. And then the Synology is essentially like a computer, and you're just plugging a hard drive into it. And we're going to go ahead and do that. So I've just gone ahead and plugged this hard drive into the USB port on the back of this DS1522 Plus, but the process is pretty much the same for all Synologies. I even have this set up for people who have rack mount NASs and it's just setting on top. It is seriously a great place to start. No matter your size of your business, it is a great on-site backup, a great place to start. Now, like most 3.5-inch external hard drives, it does have a barrel plug for power. So I'm going to go ahead and just plug that in. And that's pretty much it. We're now going to go ahead and log into Synology DSM, which you see right here, and we're going to install two apps from the package center. exFAT Access right here, and Hyperbackup. So exFAT Access is actually because we want to format this thing as exFAT. If this is a new drive, more likely than not, it is already formatted as exFAT. But if it is not, I would really recommend formatting it to exFAT. But note that will delete any files on it. So if you do have data on here, I would recommend getting it off first and formatting to that, just because exFAT is going to be great because we want to be able to plug this into either our Mac or Windows computer later on down the line if the NAS fails and be able to access our files. That's part of the really nice thing about this. And so that's why we're going to do exFAT, and Hyperbackup is how we're going to be backing this thing on up. We could also do USB copy, but in this case, it does not make as much sense. We want a true kind of emergency backup. So we're going to go ahead and install those two apps, as I've already done. And the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to log into the control panel, go down into external devices, Well, so it turns out that my power supply for that was bad. I probably grabbed the wrong power supply, so hopefully the drive is okay. It started making clicking noise, so we'll see. I just moved to this new office, as you might have noticed, and well, cords got lost in the move. So what I'm going to go ahead and do instead is actually use a unpowered drive. This is a 500 gig SSD, and it's like any other external drive, except SSDs generally do not need to be powered. And well, it's just got a smaller capacity, but this is just for a demo, so it doesn't quite matter. And I'm just going to go ahead and plug it into the back, and we're going to keep on going. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open up Control Panel, and under External Devices, it should show up as soon as it registers on N. Just like that, we can see it right here, and we can actually go ahead and format it. This is already set up as exFAT because, well, I was planning on using it in this exact demo, but we'll go ahead and format it because yours might not be exFAT. Note, formatting does delete everything on it, so be wary of that. So we're just going to hit Format and choose exFAT. It's going to take about a minute or two. And just like that, it has now been formatted to exFAT. And if we go into File Station, we will see that under USB Share 1, it shows up. One other tip I'm also going to recommend you do here is under Shared Folder, USB Share 1, hit Edit, and just say hide this shared folder in my network places. Because you don't want this thing showing up every single time. Really, you should never look at this thing except when you're checking your backups, and you will do that through here, or if the device fails. So that way it just doesn't show up whenever you try to mount SMB, and that actually can cause it to spin up, which can be annoying. You can also control its power under Hardware and Power, Hibernation, and you can choose to have it actually hibernate after it's been online for X, Y, and Z amount of time. And for a SSD, doesn't really make any sense to do, but for a cheap external hard drive, it may make sense to hibernate after 20 minutes because this thing's only going to be used once a day. All right, so now with all that out of the way, we can go ahead and actually set up the Hyperbackup job. This is the task that's actually going to back up the NAS to this drive. And that is just in our Hyperbackup. And if you've never created backup before, it's going to show you this window. Otherwise, if you've already got a backup job, you can just hit this plus button right here. And we are going to be doing folders and package backup. Now we're going to see local shared folder or USB. Obviously the same principles apply if you have other options, but for this is our USB backup, so we're going to select that. And now we've got two options here, and it's really going to be a personal choice. Multiple versions or single version. Multiple versions has the advantage of having, well, multiple versions and not having to worry about file names or anything like that. With multiple versions, it creates a .hbk file on the device that can't be read natively by Windows or Mac without special software, but it means that you can put any files in there that you like, even file formats and names that exFAT does not support. So for a real world example, if you use something like a greater than less than sign in your file names, which is okay to have on the NAS in some cases, but exFAT does not have, the way the backup works with multiple versions will solve that problem for you. Another advantage is, well, you get multiple versions. So you can say, hey, keep the last 3 weeks of versions on this thing. And so when you delete a file, you've got 3 weeks to get that data back on the backup. Snapshots can pretty much mitigate this, but it's nice to have at least a few versions if you ever do have to restore, just in case anything weird happened and that's why you're restoring. Whereas single version has the great advantage of being able to literally just be plugged into your computer and read immediately like anything else. And so you don't have to install any special software or anything like that. So it is up to you. If you do the single version method and you get some errors because of file names, come back in here and just reset it as multiple versions. We're going to show the multiple versions and how to do this software so you can actually read it on Windows or Mac. All right, so now we're going to select that multiple versions. And we're going to go ahead and create a backup task. This is one of the confusing things that gets a lot of people. Even though it says up here, backup destination settings, it's kind of, you don't really notice that. So some people think this is the folder you're backing up. This is the folder you're backing up to. And so in this case, we want to choose USB share 1 or 2, whatever you've got set up for that drive. And under directory, my NAS is named NAS1, so we can call it here, or I like to sometimes put it as the date that we're setting this thing up, just to make it really clear. And now, this is where we get to select what data we want backed up. So we can just choose specific shared folders, whatever we want to do there. You can also go really complex with it where you say, hey, I only care about this folder. I don't really care about that one. Or even file filters to include or exclude. Tons of options here. I'm not going to go over them all here, but if you have a really particular thing that you need backed up and not other things, check those out because they're very complex and very good at what they do. Next up is the applications we want to be backing up. And one other thing to note, if I was wanting to back up Synology Drive or Synology Photos, well, it's going to forcibly back up whatever folders those require. For example, Synology Photos uses the /photo folder and the home/photos. So those will be backed up even if you didn't check the home folder. Same thing for Synology Drive. If you choose to back up the Synology Drive application, it will also back up any team folders that Synology Drive has. And that's what this column says. I don't have any of those installed right now, so none of them will show up. But that's just one thing to note. If you checked it in the last menu, it doesn't really matter. It's just going to make sure to check it no matter what you choose. And we'll go ahead and say, heck, let's back up the whole thing. Now, I do want to note one thing. This is not a bare metal backup of a complete system. This is essentially a configuration of supported packages. Not all packages are supported by this. So if you notice, I've got Plex installed, but Plex is not on this list. So different things need to be backed up in different ways, and they have to support this way of backing up, which is why the bare metal backups exist. But for the most part, this is enough to get your NAS back up and running in the vast majority of instances. And really, this backup is focused on files, making sure that the NAS crashes, you have your files. Now, we're just going to go ahead and set up the task name. And we're also going to enable client-side encryption, though I want to make sure to make one thing really, really, really clear here. Client-side encryption does not protect you from hackers. Client-side encryption protects you from somebody breaking into your house or office and walking off with a backup drive. Do not enable client-side encryption unless you are somebody who knows that in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you are going to be able to know this password. Even if you're somebody who uses Bitwarden, make sure to have this in a separate place because this password, without it, your backup is completely useless. The other way this works is the password itself cannot be used to get any of your files unless they physically have access to this drive. And so what I will often tell clients to do is make it a password that your family members will know. Make it a password that your spouse would be able to guess. It does not have to be a super secure password if you do choose to encrypt here, because if somebody is breaking into your house and walking off with a drive, you're probably not interesting enough for them to have also surveyed your house and figured out your passwords. And if you are, you're a very special case for those things. But in the vast majority of instances, I recommend people be less secure with this password than more secure, because it is not a great thing to go, oh, hey, I've got that backup, and then not have the password, and now your backup is effectively useless. I give that warning a lot. I really recommend also uploading the file that this creates to your Gmail account or something like that, because once again, it is only usable if somebody physically has access to this drive. And so if somebody goes through the process of not only breaking into your house and stealing the backup drive, and they also hack into your Gmail account, I would say that that is a circumstance that is by far outside the norm for most people's data, 99% of instances. So just be wary of that. I try to overdo it because it is something that sucks to tell somebody, sorry, we don't have your password. We can't really back it up. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and just use a simple password that I'm going to know by heart. And then there's a couple of other options right here. You can also set this up to basically be a manual only backup where you remove the backup destination whenever it's done. This is great for somebody who wants to take this off-site and basically back it up once a month. Maybe you store it at your office and you bring it home once a month, plug it in, back it up, and then take it back out, in which case you could just disable the backup schedule. We're going to set up this backup schedule though to actually run at 3 a.m. And I would recommend keeping the compression on, because it's actually pretty effective for text files and things like that. There's also the integrity check. Essentially what this will do is about once a week, it's going to go in and try to restore a few files. All in the background, you're never going to notice it, but it's running like that to try to detect corruption. And so I would just leave that running and you'll kind of forget about it. And that's pretty much it for settings. There's this detailed changelog that kind of takes up a little bit of extra IOPS and performance, but it will tell you exactly what files were changed in between backups. But we're not going to set that up. And so now we're just going to go ahead and hit next. This is the warning that Synology gives about, hey, make sure you've got that key. And it's also going to download a file once we're done here that can also be used. So this file can be used in place of the password to unlock the backup. And it cannot be used to get your password, so you can safely store it on Gmail or whatever. Now we get to choose rotation. This is up to you. You can choose however you like this. This is essentially how long to keep files that have been deleted on the backup. You got a ton of space, you can keep 4 years worth of them. But for most people, I'd say like 60 versions. And they give you this little calendar that shows you it goes to 8 months. You can play around with this, and you can even set your own retention settings. But for most people, this is overkill and only should be used if you've got a lot of data. If you're kind of low on space, 5 is easy to recommend. But I'll do 60 for the fun of it. And that's it. The next question is going to ask us is, do you want to back up now? And we'll go ahead and just say yes. If you also notice that download, it has downloaded that encryption key to my downloads folder. Make sure to keep that secure and somewhere. You either need to make sure that you've got that password that we inputted or that key. You've been warned a dozen times now. Now, Hyperbackup is famously decently slow. It's working decently fast now, but it can take a while, and that is okay. It's really kind of designed to run in the background, not use very much performance, and not really get in the way. So just let it do its thing and let it run for a day or two if it needs to. USB ones are normally not too bad, but it can take a while, especially if you've got a ton of files. So now, while that is backing up, I do want to answer a bunch of commonly asked questions that I see with clients on these things. So Synology does not support splitting a single backup job over 2 different drives. So you can't run out of space on the first drive and say, oh, well, anything new, just go to the second drive. It does not really work like that. It is designed that every Hyperbackup task goes to one specific drive. And so if you do start running out of space and say you've got 30 terabytes and you really want to back it up to 2 18 terabyte drives, what you would do is you basically need to select folders to put in each drive. And that way everything gets backed up, but you can split it over 2 drives. It does not support anything else like that. Some people that works great, some people it does not at all. If you really need to get a lot of data, the next option up is normally another NAS. Buy a cheap one, wait till you upgrade, and then use that one. But there's not a way to get really the ability to take 2 drives and make it into one with USB drives. The next one is always, why do I need that? I have RAID. RAID does not protect you from the volume crashing or corruption or anything like that. Well, it helps a little bit with corruption. But having a truly separate backup means that no matter what happens physically to the NAS, well, as long as it does not affect the backup drive, means you can come back. So having a completely separate backup is really important for your really important files. For the vast majority of people, there's less than a 5% chance per year that you lose the NAS. I'd even say it's probably around 2 or 3% if I had to guess. So it really comes down to a cost-benefit analysis for you specifically. I always want to make sure no matter what happens, I've got my critical data. Your wedding photos and things like that, you really want to make sure you've got backed up. And if you don't care about the data that much, if you're like, I'm okay with a 2% chance per year of losing all that data, then don't back it up. But that's just a ballpark percentage that I tell people. I very rarely ever see people come in and say, hey, we lost all of our data because of the NAS crash. I really don't see that often. They're very stable generally, but it can happen, and that's why backups are important. All right, so now while that's running, I am going to go ahead and download something from Synology.com, which is the Hyperbackup Explorer. That's going to allow me to plug this into my Mac and read all the files off of it. So just going to go to Synology.com and go down into the downloads down here. Model, NAS, literally anything you want to choose. Just we need to get to the desktop utilities. And we are going to scroll down until we see Synology Hyperbackup Explorer. And we're just going to install the macOS version. And what this is going to do is it is going to let us read the proprietary .hpk format that the Hyperbackup is creating on our computer. So this .hpk format is not readable natively by Mac or Windows, but with Hyperbackup Explorer, you can. For people who chose single version, this is not necessary, and that is the advantage of using single version. All right, well now, it's just a waiting game. We're going to wait for that first backup to complete to continue on this video. All right, so now it took maybe like 10 minutes to back up, so it is not fast, especially the amount of data on there, but subsequent backups will be much, much faster, and you will get a version for each. I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, just to kind of show you that, hey, yes, you do get versions, especially when we're looking at Hyperbackup Explorer and all that good stuff. But in the meantime, we can double click on this guy now, and we can actually see the versions once we input our password. And I would really recommend doing this. At least, I tell people every 6 months. Every 6 months, come in, double click on the backup, and choose a file that you know you've worked on in the last week or so, and then go ahead and download it and just make sure it looks right to you. That is the best way to check a backup really, really simply. And so that is how you can check the backup. And you can see that subsequent backup took seconds. And so if we double click on it again, it'll refresh. And we will see at the bottom of our screen, 2 different versions that we can actually go back or forward in time to see different things. So that is how we can restore stuff. And if you needed to restore, you would be able to hit this button right here and go ahead and find it. So if this NAS needed to be completely restored because the hard drives crash or whatever, the first thing you would do would essentially be to install Hyperbackup and then go ahead and link it, and then you can go through the restore menu. But I'm not gonna go over that right now. I've done it in other videos. We're gonna focus on how can we get these files on our computer, because we are focusing this backup on and making sure that no matter what happens, we've got access to our data. And so now I'm gonna go ahead and just yank the power supply out of this thing. So it's gone completely down. Oh no, NAS is gone. We need our data and all that good stuff. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do now is I'm gonna plug this drive into my computer. All right, so now I've just gone ahead and plugged in that USB drive, and we can see right here, macOS has mounted it as untitled. If we double click on it, these are not our files. We can't see our files, we can't tell anything because we use that multiple version option. If we go through here, none of this really makes any sense at all. And that is because it is wrapped up in a special Hyperbackup format that .hpk file isn't natively readable by Mac or Windows. But because we chose exFAT, both Mac and Windows will at least mount the drive, and so we can use the Synology Hyperbackup Explorer that we downloaded earlier. I just double clicked on the DMG file to mount it on macOS. I'm assuming y'all can install software on Mac and Windows. So we're just going to double click on this, and it is going to go ahead and show us, hey, well, open on up. All right, so now that it has opened on up, which took a second, we have the option to either do the C2 or the local. We'll do the local. And now we just tell it where it is. So it's going to be under this, and it's this untitled folder, and it's looking for this .hbk file. And what we want to do is once we are in the .hbk file, we're going to see this bkpi file that's not even actually got any data in it. It's just a little pointer to tell it where this thing needs to be. So we're going to hit open on that, and now it's going to request that password. So now we're going to go ahead and input that. And just like that, we can browse all of these files. So now let's see, we got to get our photos off here ASAP. So let's go ahead and I'm going to just go into my raw files and let's copy these to my computer. So we'll go ahead and we can copy them wherever we want. We can actually just copy it to here and call it restored filed. And now it is going to copy all of those Lightroom files from that backup right back in here. And so it is an extra step because you do have to have the Hyperbackup Explorer on there, but you get 2 great features with the multiple versions. Well, 3. 1, you get the ability to have encryption. 2, you get the ability to store any kind of file names in there. So even if it's not a legal file name in terms of exFAT, it will still be able to be backed up because of the way the Hyperbackup file works. And 3, you get multiple versions. So that is the pro and con with using multiple versions. I will leave that up to you, but that is how we can restore our files. And just like that, we did not need a NAS or anything like that. We got our files back. And when it comes time to replace the NAS or whatever, we've got the files. So even if you say, Synology sucks, I'm gonna go to TrueNAS or QNAP or whatever, you are still going to be able to restore your files to those new devices without having to buy another Synology, which is a very nice thing to have. All right, well, that's pretty much it. We've gone ahead and set up this backup, and it's one of those things you set, forget, check in on it every 6 months, throw something on your calendar. It's just a good thing to get in the habit of doing, just because an untested backup, as they say, is wishful thinking. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to test these backups by just literally restoring them and saying, yeah, that's the photo I took. And just saying, yeah, that looks right. And you can do that, and then you just do not have to worry about it when the time does come. All right, well, that's gonna be it for this tutorial. If you'd like to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. And if you have any questions, put those down in the comments below, as well as any other suggestions for future tutorials. All right, have a good one. Bye.